The elevator jerked to a stop, and Claire's stomach turned as well. The light above flickered, making shadows that looked really creepy on the steel walls. She pushed all the buttons quickly, but nothing happened. The door opened, the emergency call button, all of them. With anger building up inside her, she said under her breath, "You've got to be kidding me." The heavy quiet was broken by a deep, funny voice. "Looks like we're stuck. What happens next will shock everyone. But before we start, let's do something fun. Comment your location below. Let's see who's watching from a farthest place. All right, let's begin." Claire turned around and saw that she wasn't by herself for the first time. A man stood in the corner and leaning against the wall, not at all concerned about what they were doing. He was tall, and his navy blue suit made him look rich and sure of himself. It looked like he had been running his fingers through his dark hair because it was a little messy. His relaxed stance and the smirk that was pulling at his lips made it look like he was used to being in charge. "Great," she said with a sigh and a crossed arm. "This is exactly what I needed today." He asked with a grin, "Bad day?" His voice was deep and smooth, and he sounded almost too sure of himself. "You could say that." Claire looked down at her phone. The cracked screen didn't light up very much. She was already late for her building interview for a job. She would have to work as a waitress for another 6 months just to pay the rent if she didn't get the job. The thought made her heart race. The man let out a sigh and slightly loosened his tie. It could be worse, he thought. We could be stuck in here with someone annoying. Claire made a face. "Give it time." His laugh was deep and smooth. "Fair enough." He put out his hand. "I'm Logan, by the way." She thought about it for a split second before shaking it. There was something strange in her chest when he touched her. His grip was strong and warm. She quickly stepped back and cleared her throat. Minutes went by. Then 10. Then 20. The button to call for help had been ringing for a long time, but no one had come to help them. Claire let out a sigh and slid down the cold steel wall until she was sitting on the ground. "This is ridiculous." Claire pointed out that Logan's watch was pretty pricey, like more than 6 months of Claire's rent worth. "I think we're in for a wait." She sharply let out a breath as she let her head hit the wall. "Yes, of course. When everything in my life is going wrong, I get stuck in an elevator with a guy in a suit." Logan made a fake face of being upset. "Some suit-wearing guy. Does that describe how you see me?" She looked at him puzzledly. "Should I be seeing you differently?" His smile got bigger, and his eyes lit up with interest. "Guess we have time for you to figure that out." With her arms still crossed, Claire gave him a mean look. "You sound like a Wall Street type, a CEO with a fancy car waiting for them downstairs." Logan's sharp blue eyes sparkled with amusement as his lips twitched. "Interesting hunch. Am I mistaken?" He thought about it for a split second before shrugging, which is a slow, intentional motion. "Well, I guess that depends on what you mean by a CEO type." Claire laughed. "That's a yes then." Logan smiled, but he didn't say yes or no to the question. Instead, he turned his head a little and looked at her. "How about you? Tell me about your sad past." Claire sighed and put her head on the cool steel wall. "I'm here to talk about a job. Or I was. But now I'm stuck in an elevator with a stranger who is probably more valuable than I am." His brows went up, and it was impossible to read his face. "In what position?" "Executive assistant," she said. "It's not my ideal job, but I need a steady income." Logan said the word stable over and over, as if he were testing its weight. "What is the dream?" She wasn't sure. That question was never asked of her in a way that made her feel like her answer was important. "Designed for the inside," she finally said. "But hopes and dreams don't pay the rent." Logan looked at her without saying a word for a moment. His eyes were serious and almost judging. He then said, in a low voice, "Not yet anyway." Even though it wasn't a bad thing, something in his voice made her stomach twist. The elevator shook before she could ask what he meant. Before it became stable, the light above flashed once. Then a crackling voice came through the speaker. "Help is on the way." Claire let out a sigh of relief. Finally, Logan gave a grin. "Your tone sounds sad." You'll miss our little time together." She gave him a blank look. "I'll be okay." After a short time, the elevator doors were forced open. Claire had to squint against the harsh electric lights in the hallway. She quickly left, as if the fresh air could erase the strange moment she had just had with a stranger. Logan walked behind at a slow pace, effortlessly fixing his suit. She was about to leave when he stopped her with his voice. "Claire." She thought for a moment and looked over her shoulder. He looked at her with his hands in his pockets and a face she couldn't quite place. He said in a smooth voice, "You never know. Maybe being locked up here today wasn't the worst thing that could have happened." She frowned because she wasn't sure if he was kidding or being serious. He smirked at her and walked down the hall before she could make up her mind. Claire watched him walk away. The meeting had been on her mind for longer than she wanted to admit. Before Claire could even gather her thoughts, a well-dressed woman in a gray suit swept up behind her and spoke with confidence. She spoke in a calm but strong voice. "Well, Miss Taylor, you're late for your interview." Claire's stomach twisted in anger, not just because of the wait, but also because of how unfair her situation was. They would still tell her she was late, though. "I'm so sorry. I got stuck in the elevator," she said, but her voice broke off and became a whisper. Before she could finish, a smooth, reassuring voice came from the corner of her mind, reminding her of the mysterious man who had been in the small room with her just before. Logan had been teasing her in a very light-hearted way. His jokes were funny, but they also had a hint of swagger that she thought was just the way a confident CEO acts. "Mr. Carter," was all it took for Claire to lose her already fragile calm when Miss Taylor's eyes quickly flicked in his direction. It felt like time slowed down for a moment. Logan Carter, yes, that was his name. He was the CEO of Carter Enterprises and the important person who ran the company she really wanted to work for. The thought hit Claire like a cold wave, and she stopped moving. Her heart was racing. Logan looked at her and said, "I'll see you soon, Claire." His face, which she couldn't read before, now had the weight of an unread promise. He then turned around and walked away, leaving her to stand alone in the elevator, where they had found shelter together in a moment of unexpected calm. Later, Claire was sitting stiffly in a soft leather chair across from a hiring manager, a controlled brunette with perfect glasses and a sharp gaze. Her mind was still racing. The clean, organized details in the interview room stood in sharp contrast to the raw, jumbled tension in her chest. The woman looked over her resume with a professional air as she started. "Miss Taylor, I understand why you're late. However, we only have a short window for this interview." Claire had to bring herself back to the present moment, so she nodded and started to answer the questions as best she could. Even though her voice was calm and her answers were measured and professional, every word she said was tinged with the memory of her meeting with Logan Carter. At that time, it seemed like every question had deeper meanings that weren't being said. What kind of person was this? He had a strange meeting with her. Would he talk about it later? Or had he just seen it as a short amusement on an otherwise normal day? As she spoke, she was thinking about her own goals and feeling a sense of dread that her work goals might be linked to this mysterious man's influence. Every pause between questions and answers made her think that her life, which was already on the verge of being desperate, might be about to change in ways she couldn't see coming or control. There was more than just the stress of a job interview in the room. There was also the weight of an unexpected meeting that had now become a part of her fate. Claire sat in the chair stiffly and could hardly keep her hands from shaking as she tried to feel everything. The interview went by quickly. Questions were asked and replies were given. But her mind was somewhere else. She had just found out that she had been teasing the CEO of the company she wanted to work for 40 minutes. As she closed her folder, the hiring manager smiled in a way that she couldn't read. "We'll get back to you soon with our choice." Claire nodded, said, "Thank you," in a low voice, and stood up, her legs shaking. She let out a long, shaky breath as soon as she left the office. She had been holding it in ever since the elevator doors were forced open. She just about made it to the lobby before she hit the ground running. What had just taken place? She was stuck in an elevator with a stranger and making fun of how rich he probably was. The next thing she knew, it was Logan Carter, the real Logan Carter. Now, there was a very good chance that he was in charge of her future. She took a big breath of fresh city air as she stepped outside and let it cool her red skin. There was a moment when she needed to take a deep breath and think about what to do next. But she hardly had time to think before a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Logan was sitting in the driver's seat with one hand on the wheel like it was nothing, like he did this kind of thing every day. The darkened window was rolled down. "Claire," he said in a smooth voice that had the same air of confidence that had made her nervous in the elevator. "Do you need a ride?" She closed her eyes and looked at him, shocked. "What do you have planned?" He smiled and tilted his head a little. "We'll give you a ride. Unless you like walking around in those heels." On a whim, Claire looked down at her shoes because her feet hurt. She was already scared of the long walk to the train. But getting in a car with Logan Carter? It's not likely the best idea. "Thanks, I can handle it," she said, stumbling around on the sidewalk. Logan raised an eyebrow and looked totally unfazed. "Think of it as an apology for what happened in the elevator. That wasn't really your fault." Still, his sharp eyes locked on hers, and there was something flashing beneath the surface that she couldn't read. Then he said, "Get in, Claire," in a lower but more important voice. It was hard to argue with the way he spoke. It wasn't smart of her, but she opened the door and slid inside. As soon as she sat down, the smell of leather hit her, rich, expensive, and with a hint of something that was uniquely him. Logan pulled into traffic without any problems. He moved slowly and easily, as if he had no time at all. Claire, on the other hand, was stuck in her seat and holding on tight to the strap of her bag like it was a lifesaver. What she did was something she had no idea about. As the silence between them grew, Logan drove the car effortlessly through the city streets. It was impossible to read his face. When he finally spoke, it was after a moment. His voice was smooth and full of interest. He didn't even look at her. "So, how did the interview go?" Claire slowly let out a breath, and her fingers tightened a little around her bag strap. "I'm not sure. I hope all is well. I need the job." Logan's eyes flickered to her, but his face didn't say what she could read. He kept asking, "Need it?" as if the word itself was new to him. She said, "Yes," and folded her arms. "Not every single one of us can run billion-dollar businesses." His mouth moved, and a smile spread across his face. "That's fine." There was silence between them, but it wasn't bad. It was tense and full of silent words. It was like they were both waiting for the other to say something they couldn't quite put into words. He spoke again after a while. "You have too many skills for that job." Claire turned to him with a frown. "Excuse me." He spoke in a cool, sure voice and said, "Executive assistant." "You have too many skills." She laughed. "And how would you know for sure?" A smirk played across the ends of his lips as he gave her a knowing look. "Your CV was read." She opened her mouth wide. "What?" "I'm in the elevator." Claire just stared at him with wide eyes. You looked through my stuff?" "It was sitting right there," he said without apologizing, as if that made it. "Okay," he then said. "You have a degree in interior design," in a way that was way too casual for the scenario. "At the top of your class. Very impressive independent work. But you're looking for a job that requires you to get coffee and set up meetings." She clenched her teeth. "I told you that dreams don't make money." Logan was quiet for a moment as he thought about what she said. His fingers were tapping on the driving wheel. He then said, "That's a waste," in a softer voice than before. When she looked at him, her eyes got narrow. "Excuse me." He just looked at her and said, You've chosen the easy way out." The words were stronger than they should have been. Claire swallowed. It hurt her stomach to feel how easily he had taken away her shields. It seemed like a fact to him, like anyone could see it if they looked hard enough. The worst part, he had a point. Claire laughed so hard that she was out of breath and shook her head. "That's simple for you to say. You have a lot of money. You don't need to worry about your safety." Logan's face could not be read. "That doesn't mean I don't get it." She looked at him very closely, hoping to see some kind of mockery in his face, but there wasn't any. It was like he was looking right through her and seeing something in her that she wasn't even sure she saw in herself. Before she could answer, Logan pulled into a parking garage and guided the car into a spot that was marked with his name. Claire rolled her eyes and frowned. "Where are we?" Logan took his seatbelt off and opened the door. "You'll see." She wasn't sure if she should follow him at first. Her brain told her over and over that this was crazy. On the other hand, the part that was definitely interesting made her open the door and walk out. Logan took her to the lobby of a beautiful high-rise by taking her through a private door and past security. Claire could feel her breath getting tight as soon as the top-floor lift doors opened. The room was huge, and floor-to-ceiling windows gave a beautiful view of the city skyline. The open concept room was filled with golden light from the sun, which brought out the rich textures of the walls and the fine details of the design. Both modern and cozy. Every part was carefully made. But what really took her breath away was the chance. She dropped her jaw in shock and said, "This is my most recent project," Logan told her, closely watching how she responded. "I bought this building to fix it up. I still haven't found the right artist." It took Claire a while to look at him because her heart was still beating fast. "Why do you want to show this to me?" His eyes stayed fixed and didn't move. "I believe I just did." Her heart rate went up. "Logan, I don't give to charity." He stepped in and said, "I don't do charity. I run a business, and I know good work when I see it." She took a deep breath and swallowed hard. "So what? Do you want to hire me?" Logan moved closer, and the stress in the air between them could not be denied. "Not any job." His voice was low and almost brave. "You should plan this space." Claire took a deep breath. "You have no idea who I am." The corner of his mouth twitched with a slow, known smile. "I know enough." As she turned back toward the big room, her heart pounded against her ribs. Her fingers curled at her sides. This was crazy. Totally and completely crazy. But as she stood there and looked at the chance in front of her, the thing she had always wanted but never thought she'd get, she realized something very scary. The girl wanted this. She wanted that maybe more than anything else she had ever wanted. Claire stepped forward after taking a slow, deep breath. Claire looked over at the stunning apartment and twitched her fingers at her sides as the enormity of the scene hit her. The room was filled with high-class features, like smooth marble countertops, warm wooden accents, and huge windows that showed off the city like a painting. Logan's confidence wrapped around her like an unseen force, pushing her towards something she had never even dared to dream of. She whispered to herself, "This is crazy." More than to him. Logan leaned against the marble counter and crossed his arms. He looked at her with the same intense concentration that was impossible to read. "Is it?" As she turned to face him, her heart was beating very fast. "Yes. You don't even know if I'm qualified for this." His grin was so calm it was annoying. "I do." Claire tried to say something, but her words got stuck in her throat. He really meant it. Very, very serious. She shook her head and said, "I don't get it." "Why me?" Logan got up from the bar and slowly walked toward her. He was so close that it was almost too much for her to handle. He said with a smooth, sure voice, "Because I don't believe in wasting potential. And you, there's a lot of ability around you, but you're afraid to take a chance." Her breath shook. "That's not true." He fixed his eyes on hers and didn't move. "Isn't it?" Claire took a swallow. Her mind was racing. She had told herself for years that she was being sensible and that security was more important than chasing something unknown. Those dreams were just that, dreams. But she felt open in this penthouse, while this man looked at her as if he saw something in her that she couldn't even see in herself. It felt like she was seeing a stranger when she looked in the mirror. Logan looked at her without saying a word. He felt like he could hear every thought going through her head. He might be able to do it in some way. Claire's mind was full of things that didn't agree with each other. "Why are you not doing it?" "Everything." "Nothing." "Fear." "Things don't work like this," she finally said, her voice lower than she meant it to be. "Chances like this don't just fall into people's lap." Logan gave her a soft laugh and shook his head as if she had said something silly. "Do you think I'm giving you something?" She frowned, and doubt showed on her face. "I'm going to give you a chance, Claire. Not a thing more or less." His voice was steady and calm. "You won't get anything if you try this and fail. But if you do well." He started to speak again, but his eyes were still on hers, intense and fixed. "That's your choice." Her heart was beating very fast in her throat. "What if I say no?" Logan slightly tilted his head as he thought. "After that, you go back to your safe little plan. Having to do a job you don't want. Having a life that doesn't make you happy." Her hands were at her sides, fists formed. His words made it sound so easy, like the only thing stopping her was her own doubt. But didn't it? She turned away from him and looked out the huge windows. The city stretched out in front of her, bright with all the possibilities that could happen. Could she really do this? Could she take a chance? They fell into a heavy silence that was full of unspoken strain. Logan then asked softly, "Tell me why you're not sure." Claire shut her eyes and slowly let out a breath. "Because I don't have a safety net if I fail." Logan spoke in a dull but strong tone. "Then don't fail." As she turned back to him, she let out a short, gasping laugh. "You make it look so simple." The sides of his mouth curled into a friendly smile. "No, it's not. But things that are worth having are never free." The air between them cracked, and there was something deep and unsaid going on. Claire knew at that very moment that she would always feel bad about leaving now. She stood up straight, lifted her chin, and looked him straight in the eyes. Claire felt seen for the first time in a long time. The air between them was thick with something they didn't say. Logan wasn't just checking her skills. He was also checking her out. She was pushed, and making her prove to herself and to him that she was meant for more than the safe life she had settled into. She said in a steady voice, "Fine. I'll do it." There was a flicker in Logan's eyes that could have been happiness or even respect. He said, "Good." He pulled out his phone before she could second-guess herself. His face was already turning sharp and focused. "Get my lawyers to work on this. The papers need to be written by tomorrow morning." Claire's stomach turned over. It was real. This was going on. There was no way to go back. The weeks that came after over the next few weeks, there were a lot of talks, consultations, and late-night studying of blueprints and swatches. Claire put everything she had into the job because she was determined to show Logan and herself that she could do it. What about Logan? He was everywhere. He was there the whole time, questioning her decisions and ideas and pushing her to think bigger, faster, and sharper. He didn't take care of her. Things were hard because of him. He was even meaner to her than she thought he would be. But she did great when things got tough. There were tense strategy talks and heated arguments about design choices, but the lines between them became less clear. She didn't know when it began. Perhaps it was the way he kept looking at her even when he thought she wasn't looking. It could have been the way he always found a reason to stand too close. It could have been that night when they were stuck in the apartment by themselves after everyone else had gone home. There was only the sound of the city outside the windows, making the room very quiet. There were blueprints all over the table, and both coffee cups were half empty from being so tired. Claire was looking at the plans and rubbing her temples. She was so angry that her chest hurt. "This layout doesn't work." Logan leaned back in his chair and smiled as he watched her. "You always get so upset about where to put furniture." She gave him a mean look. "It's not just stuff. It has to do with flow and how people feel when they walk into a room." Logan's grin went away. He looked at her, but you couldn't read his face. He then asked, "Do you care about this more than anything else?" Her chest got tight when she heard his voice. "Yes," she said in a soft voice. His eyes got darker. "Then don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you that you don't deserve to be here." Claire swallowed hard, and her heart was beating fast. She felt like she belonged for the first time in a long time. But before she could say anything else, a familiar feeling came over her like a slow-burning fire. Logan. She could feel him nearby, so she didn't have to turn around to see him. Something that they hadn't said seemed to change in the air. It had been building between them for weeks. After a long time, Claire finally looked over her shoulder and saw him watching her from the edge of the hall. Everything about him, from his perfectly cut black suit to the way he carried himself, made everyone in the room pay attention. But his look, it was locked on her. For a moment, Everything around them went away, including the sparkling lights, the chatter of high society, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Only them. Then Logan blinked, as if he were realizing what he was doing. The focus in his eyes flickered into something that couldn't be read. He turned around and shook hands with someone who had just come up to him. He then easily returned to his part as the billionaire host. And just like that, they felt like they were so far away from each other. Claire slowly let out a breath and forced a polite smile as the older man next to her kept talking. You must be thrilled. This project is a work of art. It's modern, warm, and incredibly classy. Miss Taylor, you've made a name for yourself tonight. Made a name for herself? Then why did she feel so lost? She had put all of her skills, her love, and many late nights of work into this project. When it was all done, when she was standing in the room that had only been a bunch of sketches and swatches, she should have felt whole. But all she felt was pain. A pain that was all about Logan Carter. Because she loved this project so much. She was also interested in him. After talking to guests, taking pictures, and getting more comments than she could count, Claire went to the rooftop terrace to get away for an hour. She needed some air. As she leaned against the glass fence and looked down at the city below, the cool night air touched her skin. She helped make this happen by giving it shape and life. Still, the happiness didn't feel real. A deep voice stopped her in her tracks. You disappeared. He was there when Claire turned around. Logan. She took a breath. Just needed a moment. He took a step closer and looked at her face, searching. For what reason, she wasn't sure. He said in a low voice, You should be inside having fun. She let out a low laugh. I think I've had enough champagne and small talk for one night. There was a long pause between them, heavy with the weight of words that were not said. Last, she let out a breath. You've been avoiding me. Logan's jaw got tight, but he didn't say anything wrong. It's complicated, Claire. She said, no, but her voice was barely above a whisper. It's really not. She saw the storm under his calm appearance for the first time in weeks, when his eyes got darker. He had been trying so hard to hide the fire in his eyes. He put his hand on her face and brushed her loose hair out of the way. Even though the touch was short, it made her feel cold. He said in a low voice, I didn't want to bother you. I didn't want to be the reason you held back. Her breath shook, and now, Logan looked at her with his eyes, and there was something raw and honest in his face. Now I don't think I can stay away. Claire's heart was racing. At that moment, the man standing in front of her was the only thing that counted. Below them, the city went on and on. This project was risky for her. It might have been time to try something new as well. Claire took a deep breath and held on to the cool metal fence while forcing a smile. I could say the same to you. Logan took a full step onto the balcony. His presence could be felt even with the whole city skyline in front of them. His suit was still looking great, but the bow tie that was a little loose and the way he rolled up his sleeves gave a rare glimpse of something less polished and in control. He said, I made my rounds, and put one hand in his pocket. But you belong there and should accept the praise you deserve. She took a deep breath and turned her head up to the sky. The city lights made it hard to see the stars, but she still looked for them. I don't do well with all of that. She made a vague motion toward the big hall behind them. All of that, he repeated, his voice amused. The praise and attention, the fear that someone will soon figure out I don't fit, a beat of silence. Next, you belong more than anyone in that room. She had been trying for years to shut down a part of herself that was hurt by what he said. She turned around to look at him. You say that, but I can't help but notice you've been avoiding me lately. Logan's face didn't change much, but she could see a hint of something, doubt, or even guilt. He finally said, I haven't been avoiding you. But the words were careful. I've been giving you space. Her question was, space for what? By the time he was close enough for her to see the golden spots in his dark eyes, he slowly let out a breath. To succeed without me getting in the way. Claire laughed in a dull way and shook her head. That works as an excuse. What does it really mean, Logan? Did you just see this as a game? Give the new designer a chance, be their guide, and then leave when the project is done. He clenched his teeth. You think that's what this was? She said, I don't know. But her voice was now softer. That's the trouble. You push me to be brave and believe in me more than I believe in myself. 1 minute. The next thing you know, you're a stranger. Something that couldn't be read flashed through his eyes, making them darker. Claire. She didn't breathe for a while to wait. Hopeful. That woman you saw me with tonight? He asked quickly, his voice getting softer. Claire tensed up. She didn't want to ask because she didn't want to reveal herself. He had seen it, though. Of course he had. Logan kept talking, but his tone was hard to read. She's an investor. Nothing more. Claire thought for a moment and tightened her grip on the bar. It's none of my business. Logan took another step toward her, and she could smell his clean, expensive, and unique scent. Isn't it? Her heart beat fast. Is it? The question hung between them like a big weight, because they hadn't said anything. Finally, Logan let out a sharp breath, and she could see the truth in his eyes because he wasn't holding back. You changed everything, Claire. The words took her breath away like a gust of wind. I told myself this was business, he said again, his voice rougher as if he didn't want to say it out loud, that you were just another project or skill to work on. I lied, though. Hello. To myself. Claire could feel her heart beating fast. Logan, I stayed away because I knew that the moment I let myself get too close, I wouldn't be able to walk away. Her throat got tight. And now, Logan didn't answer right away. He reached out instead, and his fingers touched hers, where they were resting on the railing. A question in silence. Another pause. Then, now, I don't think I want to. It was dark outside, and the air was thick with something fragile and electric. At that very moment, Claire knew there was no going back, no matter what happened next. Claire swallowed, but her heart was beating so fast that it hurt. I don't really fit into that world. Logan looked at her for a long time, without saying anything. That's when he said, You belong here to more than half of the people in that room. She held her breath. Do I? His face got darker, and there was a raw flashing behind his eyes. You know you do. The silence between them was thick with the weight of everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building up for weeks. Claire finally let out a sigh of relief and forced herself to say the words that had been pounding in her chest. You've been avoiding me. Logan's shoulders tensed up and his jaw got tight. I've been giving you space. The laugh she let out was sharp and not funny. Space. She shook her head, showing how angry she was. For what? His voice was calm and low, but there was something almost desperate in it. So you can finish what you began, without any other things to do. Her stomach turned. You think you were a distraction. His eyes were fixed on hers the whole time. I know I was. Claire took a deep breath. Being honest about it took all the air out of her breath. Logan. He moved toward her and cut her off. You have no idea how hard it's been to stay away. Her chest got tight, and feelings came crashing over her like a wave. Then why did you? Logan let out a fast breath, and his voice was rough and shaky. Because you deserve this. His throat hurt as he swallowed. You made a choice for the first time in your life. I wasn't going to be the reason you lost your way. Claire's throat got tight. She had times when she didn't believe in herself, but he always did. He didn't get it, though. I never wanted you to stay away. It was the lightest touch possible as his hand was raised and brushed against her face. Say the word, Claire. His voice was low and pleading. Her heart was racing, and this was the only thing in her world. Say the word. She wasn't sure who moved first, maybe she or he. But all of a sudden, his mouth was on hers, and everything else stopped. The whole world went away. There was not an event, a city, or any hopes. This is Logan. Something about the way he kissed her made her feel like he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Claire kissed him back, like she didn't want to stop. When they finally broke apart, they were gasping for air and their foreheads were pressed together. Logan barely spoke when he said, There's no going back now. Claire smiled and wrapped her fingers around his jacket tighter. Good. The dinner, the penthouse, and the success were all better than this. because Claire wasn't just building a job for the first time in her life. A future was being made for her. She wasn't doing it by herself this time. Logan led her into the apartment with a firm grip that wouldn't let go. There was still laughing, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses downstairs at the gala. But it didn't matter up here. Claire felt a chill go up her spine when the door closed softly behind them. It was hard for her to keep her mind from racing with logic, but her heart already knew what it wanted, what her heart had been aching forever since she met him. Logan put his hand over her face and traced light circles with his thumb along her cheekbone, as if he knew every part of her. His eyes were focused and searching as they met. "Are you sure?" He spoke in a low, almost timid voice. Claire took a weak breath and wrapped her fingers around his wrists. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." That was all it took. Logan smashed his lips against hers in a terrible, desperate kiss that made her heart race. His hands got caught in her hair and tipped her head back. With each second that went by, he lost control. Claire pressed against him and grabbed his jacket as if he were the only thing that could keep her grounded. She had never been kissed or felt anything like this before, as if she were the world's most important thing. It seemed like minutes or hours went by. The heat between them made time blurry. When they finally moved apart, Logan's forehead hit hers, and their still unsteady breaths mixed. "You ruined me, Claire." His voice was rough and hoarse. Her chest got tight. She let out a soft, out-of-breath laugh. "That was funny. I was going to say the same thing." He smiled slowly and meanly. "We are in trouble, then?" She laughed again, but this time it was a little looser and lighter. The best kind. Both of them were caught in the weight of the other person and didn't want to break the moment. Then all of a sudden, Logan's phone rang on the table, breaking the spell. Under his breath, he cursed, and his jaw tightened as if reality were about to hit him again. Claire wasn't ready to let go yet, though. Logan's darker eyes, when he turned back to her, showed that he wasn't either. As she stretched out on the bed, she let herself enjoy the peace and quiet for a moment, as well as the smell of Logan on her skin and the weight of his arm around her waist. It seemed like a dream that she didn't want to wake up from. But then the truth set in. Everything changed last night. She slightly turned her head and looked at Logan. He was still asleep, and his usually serious, sharp face had become less serious. The early morning light brought out the deep lines in his jaw and the thin line across his forehead. It was as if he was still carrying the weight of the world with him even while he was sleeping. Claire took a deep breath. What did that mean? Before her doubts could get too deep, Logan woke up next to her. Before he even opened his eyes, he put his arm around her waist and pulled her closer. When they finally did, they were full of something deeper and more raw that made her breathe. He said, "Morning," but his voice was still sleepy. Claire was able to smile a little. "Morning." They just looked at each other for a moment. What they didn't say was filled with everything that last night had meant and everything that it could mean going forward. Logan then reached up and brushed a hair off her face. "No regrets." The quiet weakness in his voice made her heart ache. She turned her head away. "None." But before he could say anything, his phone rang on the desk. He smiled in a small, happy way. The moment was broken. After letting out a sigh, Logan ran his hand over his face and reached for the gadget. Claire saw his face get serious and his jaw get tight as he read the message that had just come through. She sat up a little and asked, "What is it?" He thought about it for too long. He then quietly got out of bed and said, "Just work. I need to take care of this." Claire felt sick to her stomach. The tone and answer he used were the same as they were last night. They were short and vague. There was a problem. She saw him walk toward the floor-to-ceiling windows while holding his phone to his ear. He stood straight up, and his free hand was curled into a fist by his side. "That's not what we agreed on," he yelled. Claire took a deep breath in. That's exactly what she heard last night. Logan dropped his voice, but she could still tell he was mad. "Don't bother with the lies. Fix it. Keep quiet." He finished the call with a rough sigh and looked out at the city below. Waves of tension came from him. Claire pulled the sheet around herself and sat up straight as she watched him. "Logan." He turned around with a careful mask on his face. She knew when he was hiding something, because she had spent so much time with him. "Talk to me," she said in a low voice. For a moment, he did nothing but stand there and look into her eyes. He finally let out a sigh and ran his hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Try me." Before he finally gave in, there was a flicker of something on his face that looked like doubt or pause. Before he finally gave in, there was a flicker of something on his face that looked like doubt or pause. He said, "There's a deal in the works. A union. It's bigger than anything I've ever done. But something doesn't seem to fit, and I don't like having untied threads." Claire made a face. "What kind of loose ends?" He paused once more. "The kind that could change everything." She got a chill. She thought she was just taking a job and designing a place when she walked into Logan Carter's world. She realized she had stepped into something much, much bigger when she stood in his loft wrapped in his sheets and watched as his eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite name. There was no way to go back. She stretched with a slow, happy smile on her face. Her body was still humming from the night before. She couldn't get Logan's touch out of her mind, and the way he whispered her name, like a promise, stuck with her like a dream she never wanted to wake up from. He was still warm against her skin when she turned around to find him there. The bed was empty, though. Her heart sank a little. It felt like he had been gone for a while because the sheets next to her were cool. There was a moment of doubt. Had last night been a mistake for him? It seemed like it was only a moment, a line that was crossed and then repainted in the bright morning light. She got out of bed and pulled the sheets around her. Her eyes looked around the room. She could smell the rich, welcoming smell of fresh coffee in the air at that moment. Claire let out a sigh of relief, feeling less worried than she had been. She got out of bed and grabbed the silk robe that was thrown over the chair. She wrapped it around her waist loosely and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The floor-to-ceiling windows let in soft morning light that gave the sleek marble floors and stainless steel appliances a golden glow. He was right there. Logan stood at the stove without a shirt on. The morning sun shone on his toned back and strong shoulders. As he flipped something in a pan with one hand, he held a coffee cup in the other. He used to be a strong, smart businessman who ran rooms full of people, but now he was standing in his apartment making breakfast, which made her feel very warm. He turned around, as if he could feel her, and saw her looking at him. With a slow, knowing grin, he turned his lips up. He said, "Morning," in a low voice that was heavy with sleep and something else that made her stomach quiver. Claire crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. "Did you just make breakfast?" She could feel his confidence as he put the plate down in front of her. "I did." She raised her eyebrow. "You cook." Logan leaned in a little and smiled even more. "I have many talents." Claire laughed, but she couldn't stop the smile that was pulling at her lips. "Oh, do you?" His eyes got dark with pity. "As you're well aware." The thought of last night made her gut churn with anger. She rolled her eyes, but her heart was already beating faster. After getting a fork, she ate one of the soft pancakes that he had made. She looked at him with wide eyes. "Okay, this is pretty good," she said, half impressed. Logan got close, and his voice dropped to a low whisper. "I don't do anything halfway." Claire swallowed hard, and she felt her skin tingle with awareness. Not only the words, but also the way he said them. The way he looked at her made her think he was talking about a lot more than just breakfast. It was like he was telling her about last night, everything that had happened between them, and everything that was still to come. As she reached for her coffee, she hoped that the warmth would slow down her heartbeat. As she took a slow sip, she tried to sound relaxed, even though she was shaking inside. She asked with a raised lip, "So, do you always cook breakfast for the women you sleep with?" Her tone of voice wasn't teasing, but it was still what she meant. Logan's face changed, and there was something unclear in his stormy eye. He looked at her for a moment, as if he were thinking about what to say. She got a chill when he said, "I don't sleep with women, Claire," in such a soft voice. She made a face. "Well, you obviously do." His eyes got darker and locked on hers with such intensity that it made her heart race. "I don't sleep with them." His tone of voice was strong and serious. "I don't stay." Her breath shook. "You stayed with me, though." The words were barely above a whisper, but they were heavy with meaning that wasn't said. Logan's jaw got a little tighter before he gave a single nod. Yes, they could feel something in the air between them that they didn't want to name. Claire put down her fork. Her heart was beating so fast that she was sure he could hear it. She started to say Logan, but her voice got weak. She gulped hard and forced herself to ask the question that had been bothering her since she woke up. What are we doing? He felt something in his jaw move. He turned his head away for a split second and then looked back at her, but she couldn't read his eyes. What do you want us to be doing? She paused because she was afraid. She had spent so long convincing herself that this, whatever this was temporary. Logan Carter wasn't the type of man to get involved with other people. That she was just another project for him, another short-lived interest that he would soon put away, like the apartment they had built together. He stayed, though, and now he was asking her what she wanted. She inhaled shakily, her hands curling into fists on her lap before she forced herself to meet his gaze. I want this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you. Logan let out a breath, and his shoulders relaxed a little. As he reached across the counter and put his fingers through hers, the stress that had been making his body so stiff seemed to leave him. His hold on her was warm and steady, like an anchor in the storm that was going on inside her. He said in a low voice, "Then that's all that matters." She tried a small smile, but it was too early. She gave herself permission to believe it for the first time, that maybe this was real and she wasn't just a small part of his life. But somewhere inside, a small voice asked, "What do we do when reality hits us?" Did this story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how powerful was this tale? Smash that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story that stirs your soul. For more heart-racing, emotional tales, tap the end screen now.